Hi guys, back for round 3. I just want to give you work through another example of a Punnett square, and then show you some of the complex issues that you can use genetics or applied genetics to. So we'll start out with our example that we have up here. We have a man and a woman, both with brown eyes, marry and have a blue-eyed child. What are the genotypes of the man, the woman, and the child? Well, let's dissect this a little bit. So it tells us that the man and the woman both have brown eyes and they have a blue-eyed child, right? So the very first thing was, well, how do I figure out which trait is dominant? Again, they're assigning a capital letter B or an uppercase letter to brown eyes. So we're going to work with that and say, okay, brown eyes must be dominant. So if I'm going to start writing out the genotypes of the man and the woman, I would start by giving the man and the woman each the dominant allele that's giving them the brown eyes, right? Now, it says that they have a blue-eyed child. And the only way, because blue eyes is a recessive trait, the only way that the blue-eyed child can actually have blue eyes is if they are homozygous recessive for that. And homozygous recessive, again, looks like this. So this must be the child being homozygous recessive. Well, how does the child end up with 2 recessive alleles? Remember, for every gene that you have, you received 1 allele for that gene from mom and 1 allele for that gene from dad. So in order for a child to have 2 recessive alleles, the only plausible explanation is that both mom and dad carry a copy of that recessive allele. So let's go ahead and give mom and dad a recessive copy of that allele. And then let's assign those alleles out on the Punnett square and see, in fact, if we actually come up with a blue-eyed child. So there's our alleles. So dad's alleles up across the top, mom's alleles down here on the side. If we draw them out, oops. And you can see, if we did our ratios, our genotypic ratios, we would have a 1 to 2 to 1 genotypic ratio, 1 homozygous dominant to 2 heterozygous to 1 homozygous recessive, a 1 to 2 to 1 genotypic ratio. And we'd also have a 3 to 1 phenotypic ratio, where the top 3 here, these 3 around the corner, they would all have brown eyes. And then here is that one child right here that has blue eyes. So you can see that this husband and wife, no matter how many children they have, every time they have a child, there's a 25% chance, or a 1 out of 4 chance, that they're going to have a child with blue eyes. There's a 75% chance that any child they have is going to have brown eyes. So let's take a look at some of the other things. Genetics. Run through these quickly, just because we're in a unique situation. But I know in the meiosis gizmo, it talked a little bit about a karyotype, and I wanted you to see a karyotype and some of the information that a karyotype can tell you. So a karyotype is a picture of all of the chromosomes inside a cell, and it can give you a lot of pieces of information. Number one, it can tell you what the sex of the individual is. So a karyotype, you can see chromosomes are numbered 1 through 23. The first 22 pairs 1 through 22, no matter if it's a male or a female, are called autosomes. Autosomes are chromosomes that contain all of the genetic information that's responsible for body traits, for the proteins, etc. The last pair of chromosomes right here, and again, it doesn't matter if you're talking male or female, but the last pair of chromosomes are the sex chromosomes. And if you are male, you have an X and a Y, and if you're female, you have 2 X's. And you remember in your meiosis gizmo, the calico male cat. remember he had a genetic condition where he had an extra X chromosome and he was actually XXY. You can actually have an extra chromosome of any of the numbers. In fact, having an extra chromosome number 21 results in Down syndrome. Having an extra chromosome number 13 is called trisomy 13 syndrome. You can have an extra chromosome 18, which is called Patau syndrome. You can actually end up with an extra chromosome as the result of non-disjunction in any one of the numbered pairs. Want to talk about this a little bit. Who determines the sex of a child? What is the chance that anytime you have a husband and wife together, what is the chance they have a female child? What is the chance they have a male child? Well, you can actually apply a Punnett square to this as well. So if you have a female who is XX and you have a male who is XY, we can take those two chromosomes and we can separate them out just like we do for our alleles when we're doing a genetic cross. So here is mom. So basically what we're saying is that a female is producing egg cells. She has the ability to pass on to her egg cells only the X chromosome because that is all she has. Males, on the other hand, when they produce sperm cells, they have the ability to produce sperm cells that have either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. So when you do the Punnett square, there's a 50-50 chance anytime fertilization takes place. There is a 50-50 chance that the offspring will be female or a 50% chance that the offspring will be male. Now remember, Punnett squares only show us the probability of having that. Certainly, and you might know this, you may have families like this where they have 10 children and they're all girls, right? Or you can have 2 puppies have a litter and they're all male. Punnett square doesn't tell us what will happen. It's telling us what could happen. So in this case, who determines the sex of the child? Well, that's always dad. All right. Again, because dad has the ability to provide the sperm cells with either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, and that goes for any male sexually reproducing organism. They're going to be able to produce X or Y chromosomes. Females are only going to be able to pass on an X chromosome. So the male or the dad is always determining the sex of the child. We're going to kind of move past incomplete dominance and codominance. Sex-linked traits. So since we were just talking about the X and Y chromosome, there are some genetic traits that are specifically found on the X chromosome. But the Y chromosome is shorter. It contains less genetic information than the X chromosome. So when we talk about sex-linked traits, we're talking about traits that are only found on the X chromosome. And specifically, sex-linked traits affect males in more predominantly than they do females. And that is because males have only one copy of the X chromosome. So if they happen to receive a copy or an X chromosome that contains a bad copy of a gene, well, they're out of luck because they don't have any counterpart on the Y chromosome. Whereas females, because they have 2 X chromosomes, if they receive a bad copy on one, they still have that second copy, that might be a dominant gene to protect them from any physical traits. Some examples of recessive conditions that you are, I'm sure, most likely familiar with are color blindness. Color blindness is a sex-linked trait. It is a phenotype that affects males more so than females. And you can have red-green color blindness, blue-green color blindness. There's even red-yellow color blindness. And you may have gone to the eye doctor and have been given one of these color blindness tests before. You should be able to see, over here is kind of your answer key, but you should be able to see numbers in between all of these colored tiles. Example is hemophilia. Hemophilia is the inability of blood to clot properly. So even minor wounds, such as a bruise to the elbow, will cause some serious internal bleeding that can happen in a very prolonged time. This is, again, a condition that affects males much more so than females. There are a couple medically documented cases of female hemophiliacs, but not many. There are some other sex-linked conditions. Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is one. Male pattern baldness is another. And sex-linked conditions don't just affect humans. As you can see, there are, in the case of cats, coat color is a sex-linked trait. It is whether or not a cat has black fur, orange fur, gray fur, it's all indicative of the interaction of the genes on the X chromosomes. Fruit flies. Maybe you're starting to get them in your kitchen right now. Fruit flies have different eye colors. They have white and red eyes, or they can have black eyes. But the white and red eyes is actually a sex-linked trait. And then the last thing I just want to show you guys, there are these things called pedigrees. Pedigrees are like a family flow chart to show you how a trait is passed down in multiple generations. You may or may not have worked with these last year in science class. I'm going to talk about multiple alleles. Some traits are controlled by more than just 2 alleles. Blood type is a really good example of that. Blood type is a multiple allele system where you actually have A, B, and O alleles. So if you have type A blood, you inherited either 2 A alleles, one from each parent, or you inherited an A and an O allele. If you are type B blood, you inherited 2 B alleles from each parent, or a B and an O allele. If you are AB, you inherited an A and a B allele from your parents. If you're type O blood, you inherited an O allele from each parent. This is also a case of what's called codominance. And you can see that that's present right here in this AB phenotype. So when you have AB blood type, the A and the B they work together to create a third phenotype. So A doesn't dominate B, B doesn't dominate A. They work together, which is why it's called codominance. Unfortunately, we don't have time to kind of, look and play around with blood type as we would in our usual setting. So that's just a quick run through. And I think your meiosis thing talks a little bit about chromosome mutations, etc. Again, here's an example of having trisomy 21, having 3 of chromosome 21, causing Down syndrome. You can also be missing chromosomes, as is the case in Turner syndrome. So here, males are missing there's the second X chromosome is missing. And then having that 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome, like your cat in the meiosis video. All right, so guys, that's a quick wrap up of the rest of DisGenetics. Talk to you again soon.